What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Panthers Nation Network. We took a bit of a hiatus in between seasons, as we always do. And of course, though, we knew this was coming, so we had to come back and give an emergency episode to break down the newest development in Panthers Nation, which is, of course, the hiring of Frank Reich as the full-time head coach. So we'll go off of it. I'll give my 2 cents because, it's easy when you're a Panthers fan to be polarized by decisions. It's very easy. They do a lot of things that are either really good or really bad, so where you're able to have emotions. This one was a tough one because I feel like from the get-go, it was, all right, Wilks. And for me, it was always Wilks, especially after the fact. But, we saw the writing on the walls of some of the issues that Wilks possessed as a head coach. But I personally thought that he did enough to garner getting the position full-time. But I understood where some of the issues lied. The issues I had more so were the fact that they said it was going to be a short list of people that they were going to be talking to, and they brought in a baker's dozen people to interview for the position. And when only 2 of them were defensive-minded, we knew that was probably not a good sign. If there was anyone that was going to get it outside of Wilks, I begrudgingly say I was okay. I was happy with it being Reich. Beforehand, I when I first heard of him as being a candidate, I was not okay with it because I thought that he had done not very well, at least in his time in Indianapolis. But then as I started to pour over some of the recaps and some of the things about it, I could see where it wasn't all necessarily his fault and where the pros outweighed the cons. So I'm sitting here, I was mad off the jump because I really wanted it to be, I really wanted to be Wilks. He was, more so of a hometown guy. I know Frank is too, but I thought he had more of the people behind him. And I thought he just did enough this season, honestly. I thought so to prove. And I think if it wasn't for the fact that, Rule did what Rule does, I think Tepper would have fired off on maybe the more cost-worthy decision, because I think Wilks has maybe a lower floor, but we'll talk about that. Jason, what was your thoughts on it coming off the jump?
Off the jump, it was a very emotional. I think everybody's aware about how I felt about Wilks and how I was pushing for Wilks and even who I wanted to come in as OC. So for me, it was an emotional situation, and then I had to take a step back and look at it from a 10,000-foot lens. And looking on it, Tepper kept saying he wanted an offensive-minded coach. That was all he kept talking about. That's all you ever read about. If you were talking about tertiary news outlets, it was all about, we need an offensive-minded coach. We need an offensive guru. So to your point, Jack, you just brought it up. The plethora of coaches that we brought in the short/huge list that we brought in, what was it, 2 or 3 defensive coordinators, including Wilks? Everybody else is offensive-minded. I think moreover, from a holistic standpoint, the way I look at Reich is, to your point, if I had to pick somebody, I would have gone with him. We did not get a chance to interview Johnson out of Detroit, who I thought may have been somebody I may have leaned towards, if at all. But outside of that, the emotions are gone now, and now we can talk about the legitimacy of what Reich brings to the table. I think he does have a historical significance. He is of the Jim Caldwell tree, which is quite ironic in the fact that we did interview Jim Caldwell too. So that's a whole nother concept within itself. So he is of the Caldwell tree. He's of the Dungy tree. So he has a good foundation. He has a Super Bowl ring. He's got 14 years of NFL experience. He's been an OC, a QB coach. So, you can only knock him so much. I think for the most part, me being a true fan, I wanted Wilks. I felt like I was spurned in that. The players came to bat for Wilks. There were even old alumni, pushing for Wilks. So I think that was the part that was really tough to swallow.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's an emotional thing because it's always, when it comes to the Panthers and most NFL organizations, it is an emotional thing, and it had a different basis than, a guy coming off of just coming off to be an interim coach. It was different than like what was his name? Perry. What I remember what Perry's name was. Perry Fuel, the last interim head coach we have. It's a different bag of cats there. So I think that made it hurt a little more because you also you knew the history behind Wilks, and it was kind of indicative and kind of the same thing with Cam. He had gotten in a bad spot where he went, and you wanted him in his second term around to be successful with us and to continue to have that success, and he was doing so. Now, Michael from Panthers Ranter, he kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, there was issues we had talked about. There was times in a very Rivera way, he was a bit too conservative, in areas where he shouldn't have been, and that is tough for Tepper, because not only does he wants a conservative, not a conservative coach, he wants a surefire coach who's able to take those chances, because you got to be able to put those things together, especially when you're a defensive coach. If you're an offensive coach being conservative, that is, a whole different issue. But a defensive coach being conservative, I mean, the problem was, though, you had, as a defensive minded coach, we still had, it was a very marginalizing stats when you have your offensive rushing records that we set, both also yards in a game. We had the franchise record, and I think it was 527, and it was 306 rushing yards, which is a franchise record as well. But then in the same respect, if we didn't run the ball 40 times and get 200 yards, we lost the game. And that happened multiple times. And that's not something that you can continue to do. I think also, and something we can talk about, I think honestly, the playoff push did him a bit more harm than good when you got down to it.
Yeah. I think you gave a great point there. I think you're right. We look good going into the playoffs, but then when we got to the playoffs, it was much more of a stutter step. We didn't look as defined and as crisp as we had in a couple of the games, ending the season. Those things definitely played a factor in it too. I think you coupled on a couple of things with that. I would also say too, when you look at Reich's kind of portfolio, he was the one that helped Peyton Manning get his 4th MVP when he was up there with Caldwell as his QB coach. He was the one that worked with Phillip Rivers out in San Diego. Phillip Rivers was his heyday in San Diego. So he does have, and that's what I'm saying. Like you were saying, like that was your second choice. So he does have that historical significance. I think, 4 seasons with the Colts as a head coach. We talk about his head coaching resume. Yeah, he had 4 seasons with them. They were 3 seasons above 500. They were 1-2 in the postseason. He had an 11-5 season. I think it was a 10-6 season, and then a 9-7 season, I think, or something of that nature. So he does know how to coach. He does know how to get the best play out of his guys. He's known as a player's coach and a coach's coach. So again, you take the emotion out of it. This isn't a bad hire. It just wasn't the hire that the fan base wanted.
No, and it wasn't the hire that, we thought a lot of the players wanted either, and that's another thing that could be concerning. Now, it came out, if the reports are to be believed, that a good amount of the team leaders went to Tepper and said they understood the reasoning behind the hire and they would back up Reich, and that speaks to, how he is respected across the league and respected in what he does. So that makes me feel a little bit better. I mean, it makes me feel a little bit better about Tepper's decision making. I think he wanted, it was almost like I said, it's an overcorrection almost from what you had with Rule. And I think that served to, be crucial and against Wilkes, is that the fact that he was going to overcorrect because he had been burned so badly by Rule that he didn't want to make a similar decision and make a similar mistake. So he went with the guy who was more proven and had more to do. So that's where I am a bit better. I'm just happy he didn't throw the bank at Sean Payton, because no matter what, I don't think there's anything that he brings to the table that was worth giving up that much to a rival organization, especially from a business standpoint. I think there was no rhyme or reason to do that, especially when you could see the writing on the wall that Payton did not care about where he was going. He wanted a good deal for what he was getting. And he wanted I think he's trying to get a good deal for the Saints to help them out. I really honestly do. I think he's trying to get a good deal around him so that the Saints can be brought back into relevancy. So I'm just happy that Tepper, didn't continue to entertain that in the second rounds.
Well, yeah. I think he hit something there too. He talked to Harbaugh. He didn't have to give him as much for Harbaugh, but then you had to deal with Harbaugh's mentality and what the rumor mill was about him in San Francisco. He was almost Michael Singletary in the way that he kind of dictated his coaching staff and the way the players played. So that one was kind of going to rub the players, I think, that we haven't played the wrong way. talk about Sean Payton. You talk about Sean Payton trying to set up a deal for the Saints. I think one thing about that is we would have mortgaged more than our future trying to get Sean Payton. You talk about relevancy. We wouldn't have been relevant for another 5 to 6 to 7 years if we would have gone in with Peyton. We would have given up way too much. And I truly don't think the Saints would have probably dated us until it was time to go to the prom, and they would have said, "Nah, we're good. We're gonna go with the homies." So that wasn't going to be anything that was going to be beneficial for us long term. I think the one thing that we do gain in this situation is that we do have an offensive minded person who has won a Super Bowl ring. We do have an offensive minded person who's been proven to be able to be kind of a quarterback whisperer, and has been able to bring the best out of Carson Wentz, who is now floundering. He had Jacoby Brissett balling out when he was up at the Colts. Again, he had Phillip Rivers. He helped Peyton Manning. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see his work with Andrew Luck the way we wanted to because Andrew Luck retired on him. But I think we would have brought Andrew Luck along. So if we're talking about going out, drafting a quarterback, or looking for young talent on that offensive side of the ball, we have somebody in place on paper that seems like he can bring that to fruition. I will say this though, Jack, and I'm going to be the first to say this, and this is now January 26, 2023. Let this man come out and be 0-3. We're going to have a whole nother discussion come week 4, and we're going to be touting where is Steve Wilks and why wasn't Wilks hired. But that's just an underlying thing that he's going to have to compete against, which is why I also believe that they did respect Wilks in a certain kind of a way, whether how odd it may look, they did respect him and not asking him to come and work as the DC underneath right. Because already there was a smack in the face. And let's be 100% honest. Back about what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we did this cast and we were talking, and Frank Reich's daughter was hired into the marketing side of the business
That
on the
should have
Panthers
been. I
side.
mean, you
And
saw
that was kind of the telltale sign, right?
they put that video out today. With the little action figure of Reich as a play. That takes time to make. That thing you don't just put that together in 4 or
Certainly.
5 hours after this. I mean, they put it out 25 minutes later. That takes time to make. They had the decision. I don't think before the second round of interviews. I think it was that second round of interviews that had to have given Reich the gig. Because again, if reports are to be believed, it seemed that Reich came in with not a wish list of who we'd want. Because we know according to reports that that Wilks had a list of guys he wanted to put in the coordinator positions that he was going to pitch to him. Now, whether he actually talked to those people or they were feasible, that's left to be known. Now, from what it seems, Reich actually had was already interviewing, or not interviewing, but reaching out to potential coordinator candidates and went in to that. And knowing that he had that in his belt, I think that probably impressed Tepper a lot. And to say that, okay, you've done your homework, you want this together. So we're going to, that was the final, the final cherry on top to give it. I'll say though about the starting slow, I think that, that's something that would have happened regardless. Cause if Wilkes got the job and he starts 0-3, you've had this whole offseason to get together. Now the players have been behind you. What happened? You've lost all this momentum. I think that the slow start is going to come regardless because whenever, no matter what happens, we have to be prepared for a slow start because, like Mike was saying here, Frank Reich had those slower starts. But what you have to be prepared for is the fact that we're going to be going in with a fresh offensive coordinator, which Lord hopes that we'll be hiring him before the month is out. At least I would hope in the next, by Valentine's Day or the end of February, at least. Then I would imagine with this hiring, it tells me what I need to know about Tepper and what his ideas are right now. It tells me that they are going to have a new quarterback under center come the start of the season. So you're already going to that's another variable. And whether or not that's after the draft or it's before the draft or it's, halfway through the off season, that's another variable that got to throw in there. And then you're going to more than likely have a new defensive coordinator. You're obviously going to have a new defensive coordinator as well because Holcomb's not going to stay. They're all already taken off of the website, all their profiles. Then that's McAdoo, Wilkes, all of them. So there's going to be a lot of variables. So I think it's going to be a slow start. That first month is going to be rough. And what it's really going to come down to, especially for Frank, is that how do you rally through the end of that? How do you cultivate a team that can be successful without, the pieces in place to be good? The one thing I will say is I'm very, very happy, honestly, that we don't have McCaffrey anymore. Now, You can say and I'll explain why. You can say what you will about how he's performed and what he's doing in the playoffs right now, and you can be spiteful all you want, and you can say it's a weird move to hope that he does well. I hope that he does well because I would like to see him do well. If that makes me odd to say, so be it. What I'll say though about it is that I'm happy we don't have him because you saw how kind of marginalizing that offense was with Jonathan Taylor and what happened when Jonathan Taylor went down. When he was not healthy, couldn't get a word in edgewise from that offense. And so I think you could have seen a similar situation off of another, health impaired running back in Christian McCaffrey. I think you could have seen a similar crutch develop in McCaffrey. So I'll be interested to see what kind of offense Frank brings to the team. It's going to be, I think, a little bit different than our offenses in the past because we've had defensive-minded coaches, so we've been more run-heavy. I'll be interested to see if it takes more of a turn towards a pass-heavy offense.
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I think you make a great point. Not having Christian McCaffrey as a new coach coming in, you don't necessarily have to build your offense around him, and that was proven after Rule left. And we were able to trade him away. And to your point, I wish him all the best. I actually want him to get a ring this year. I miss him, but our offense even thrived even more when he was out of it, right? We talked about this throughout the back half of the season. It really showed you the tools we had in our tool bag. Again, Dante Foreman, Chuba Hubbard, they came out and they did work for us. You can't take anything away from those guys. And I really hope that both of them thrive in this Frank Reich offense. I think also with Frank Reich coming in, I think you're going to see the passing game be a lot more fresh, right? We're not going to keep doing the same old screens and trying to do these quick end arounds with our receivers, right? If you look at the offense that he ran it with the Colts, he had T.Y. Hilton and he had I can't think of the other guy on the other side of T.Y. then, but he had a pretty
Michael Pittman,
it might have been Michael Pittman, right? And he had a pretty decent tight end, so he was able to move the ball around to open up that run game from Jonathan Taylor. And I don't think Jonathan Taylor's had a season like he's had since Reich has left. So you take all those factors into consideration. I think that bodes well. You touched on something I did want to discuss, and that's the defensive side of the ball. I don't know who Frank Reich is going to tap for that, but we need to be very cautious in how we do that and we approach that. I don't want to bring in, because as far as I can recall, when Reich was at the helm at the Indianapolis Colts, I don't remember their defense being that dominant. Not nasty. I mean, we've got the nasty players to play in our system that we had with Wilkes, but will they still thrive in the same way in whatever Reich brings to the table with his coaching staff? That's something that I'm questioning in a large way.
So I think I would actually say their defense was pretty stout at times. You think about the guys, especially that they had on their team. They were able to do good with some better guys. I mean, Gilmore was out there still playing like an All-Pro, and it wasn't just because he went to because it's because it's Gilmore, and B, it's because he went to a place where he could do so. I think that the best case scenario. And I know they talked about Vic for OC Srijan. I'm gonna hope I pronounced that right. You hit nail right on the head. That would be one thing. But then also Gus Bradley was a name that I've been hearing thrown around. He has ties to both Fitterer and has ties to Frank Reich, and that would be, I think, your ideal pairing to put that together, because that to me would then, because that's like you said, I'm a little worried about the defense falling off, and we're not at a time right now. You need a coordinator that with all these younger guys can come in and still keep their progression along. I mean, that was the whole issue, because Tepper and Rule loved that. They wanted that, young guy they could cultivate, and that's why we kept Yetur Gross-Matos and drafted him in the friggin' first place over Justin Fields, but we're not going to talk about that. I'm sorry, not Justin Fields, over Jalen Hurts. But they got him and then kept him because I figured he would be better than Hassan Reddick, and we could keep him and develop him instead of Hassan Reddick. And Lord knows that went well. So I'm hoping, either Vic Fangio I could see, or I could see Gus Bradley. And that's going to be, I honestly hope he picks his defensive coordinator first. It doesn't necessarily carry a whole lot of weight either way, but I would, as a chess match kind of thing strategically, I'd like to see him go defensive coordinator first, so it shows that he's trying to still put emphasis on that. His offensive coordinator position is obviously a crucial one, But I think that defensively as well, that's going to need to be something where he can take it and run with it, because you can be an offensive minded coach all you want, but with the young guys that we have on defense, where we have virtually no veteran leadership outside of Shaq and Xavier Woods, you need a guy, head coach, that can rally them. I think,
Yeah.
that was one of the issues with Al Holcomb, was that there wasn't that veteran leadership as a defensive coordinator. There was the familiarity there, but there wasn't really the leadership there, and that you could see the deterrence in the defense when it would fall apart towards the end. We saw that, especially that Buccaneers game, and I think that, like we said, was the final nail in the coffin because of how that game ended. So I think you need to make sure you have a guy out there who can be a leader for this defense, because it's not going to come from you now. Frank has, for all of his highs, I think does have, he's a bit of a more stoic guy. And so is Wilkes, though. So it's not, it's something that Panthers head coaches have tend to had. But it will be interesting to see what an offensive-minded head coach means for the Panthers. It will be interesting to see how that, especially with the guys that we have right now. And it'll be interesting to see what Fitterer does in free agency and in the draft.
Oh, no questions. I think certainly, all those are factors. But one thing I do want to touch on, let's talk about our owner, and the fact that he's had 5 coaches in his short ownership regime. He's 29-53 for a record. He's 0-5 to make it to the postseason. And to be frank with you, and we can't shade over this whole point about, quote unquote, the Rooney Rule. I mean, he did his due diligence, he did everything, but at the end of the day, with everything being touted for that, the black eye does fall on an organization when it comes to that. Now, it remains to be seen, did we have the best coach for our organization, right? At the end of the day, that's what you want from an owner. But Tepper's record right now as an owner, from a 1-5, I mean, he's teetering right on that 1, if not below a 1, just based on his relationships with the city, his relationships with our neighboring state, his relationships not only with that piece, but also with just the coaching staff and the decisions that he's made. So this decision with Frank Wright could be take him over to the lighter side of things and making a amends with the city and with the fan base, or B, be one of those things where we all look at him when he hired Matt Fool and put us in the predicament we had with Matt Fool and the Temple football organization that he was putting together. So to me, this is much more of an indictment on Tepper's regime as an owner, and to see what comes of it, because right now he doesn't have a very good batting average, and he's not bringing the city together as a whole from a winning perspective. He hasn't put, quote unquote, a good product on the field, except for when Wilkes was at the helm, if you ask me. So I mean, he's got a lot of ground to make up, and I'm hoping, as a fan first, that Wright can bring that back. And the fact of the matter is, Wright wasn't around for the keep pounding mantra, right? He was back with Kerry Collins. So that whole piece of how we've identified ourselves leaves with Wilkes. So that's something too Tepper's going to definitely have to tap into and bring back, and to show it front and center.
And you hit a couple great points there, and I'll kind of rattle them off. I mean, you talk about the head coaches and ownership, and if you want to be really depressed about the state of ownership for Charlotte sports, I'll tell you that 5 coaches in his tenure, now be it 2 of them being interim as well, that is 1 more than the Charlotte Hornets have had since Michael Jordan has bought the team. And that is crazy enough in and of itself. Now, granted, there's been about 3 different times, or there's been 5 different head coaches, one of them being the same guy and Steve Clifford going twice, but 4 more, that's 1 more head coach than the Charlotte Hornets have had since 2010, and Tepper has done that since 2020. So do the math there, take that how you will. I mean, we talk about it, and you talked about it a little bit there too. I think that, like I said, had it been Sean Payton, Shane Steichen, I could have understood. Ben Johnson, I can understand. Had it been Sean Payton, that to me would have been, okay, you don't care about really the city or the sports. I understand people want to say what they want to say about Sean Payton. You can make your piece. But from a team perspective, It just, I could not have stomached doing that, no matter how much he has brought to the table. You can say what you want about him. You can say what you want about Drew Brees. They still only got one of these. They still only got one of these, and they only made it another time, if I'm remembering correctly, in his tenure. So they got, and that's of course one more than we have. But either way, I would not have wanted to give that money. You would have seen that, from a business perspective, it would have been a bad move, and then from a fan perspective and a city perspective, again, there was a lot more cons than pros in my mind. So the fact that he took the time to iron it out and still went with the guy that has ties to the city, I think shows positive growth in Tepper. And maybe that was Nicole that brought it on and smacked some sense into him and said, you got to do something that's going to make these people happy, because you have not done so other than 2 or 3 times to pacify the people and bringing Cam back, or, bringing the Charlotte FC, but then you've still managed to mess up those scenarios. So that's kind of a wash. And Jason, you can talk more about it, and I can, mention it as I will. You don't want to believe that there was a sole reason, why that he was judged a bit harsher than other candidates, but you have to think about it at least a little bit. And for me, you could say what you will about, like I said, some of the conservativeness, some of the issues on your offensive inconsistency, but again, you took a team that was already dead to rights with a roster that people had just written off and had just traded away its best piece, and went 500 in that time frame in a schedule that you had gotten past what was arguably the tougher point, but still not an easy schedule in that and of itself. And he also spoke to literally what your team mantra is supposed to be, what the system is supposed to be. Now, there's something to be said about the fact that we've always been concerned about what Tepper has thought the culture of this organization is going to be. And it felt like he was always in limbo for the culture. We always clamored to get our old culture back. Maybe that's not the best thing for this organization. Maybe Tepper sees that, and knowing that Frank Reich is not necessarily different in his perspective, but would put a different kind of culture out there that still plays to what the city and the team is all about. So maybe that's where the final, nail hit the coffin, where he said, I could stay with Wilkes. He would speak to the keep pounding mantra. He's got the team in the city behind him, and he does have he has a ceiling. He's got a lower floor. Or I take a gamble that's a bit of a safer gamble and go with the guy that, yes, might not be the exact right person for the job in terms of what the people want, but if I want to have a culture of my own as an owner, this would be the guy to do that. And maybe that's kind of where the decision came down to. But you have to question, if it was Jerry Richardson making the call, you'd have a bit more reasoning as to why it didn't go that it went to Reich and not to Wilkes. But I'll let you speak on the rest of it, because I
think you bring up some great points there, and I think you brought up some really good facts in that. I think for me, if you look around the league and all of the coaching candidacies that were out there this year, and the amount of interviews that went on across the league, right, and who's getting hired for head coaching jobs, and this has been an issue that we've talked about decade in and decade out. It hasn't gotten better. That it was pacified through the Rooney Rule for many years, and many people have gotten many opportunities, and then when they did get the opportunities, they were shafted, like Wilkes was in Arizona, like Raheem Moore got in Tampa, even though he was much younger. I think he's a lot more polished now. How Flores was treated in Miami. So all of those things play a factor into it. And I agree with you. I think you made a point as well to say, maybe he was judged a little bit harsher. But the whole team was judged harsher. I think, moreover, for me, we don't know what was said behind closed doors. We don't know what Frank Wright presented as his plan. We don't know what Wilkes presented as his plan. Maybe Frank Wright had his ducks in a row and was like, look, I got a full coaching staff ready to go. That could be where he was and what he put into place. And maybe Wilkes had a wish list of who he thought he could get and didn't have anything solidified. That could have been an issue as well. I think the biggest thing that came across to me is we didn't want to what you just said. Maybe we don't need to go back to that keep pounding mantra. He can probably speak to it from a vibe or a mood standpoint in the stadium, in the locker room, but maybe he's moving it and trying to shift the culture to something different. And the way to do that is to get out of the defensive mindset and move into an offensive mindset. I'm not saying that Wilkes was judged unfairly. But what I can tell you is the process in which we've seen in the past kind of precipitates to that mentality. So you can't ignore it. We can speak to it. We just don't know what the 100% of what it was. But the proofs and the pudding and the facts are the facts. If you look around the league, you can see how many minority coaches we have in place. If you look around the league, you can see who keeps getting hired over and over and over again. Even the unproven people who keeps getting hired over and over again. So I'm not going to speak more into that. You can see that for your own self. It's been talked about over and over again. The one thing I'm disappointed in, and I think, like I said, it's all from a fan base mentality and me being disappointed in the fact that you can speak to it. Shantice, he could probably talk to it. I've been screaming for Wilkes since midseason. I've been screaming for Pep Hamilton to be our OC since midseason. So that's just where my heart was. I was feeling real good up until about 2 days ago that we had a possibility of that reunion happening. Just because, first of all, I went to West Charlotte. Those are West Charlotte alums. I would have loved to see my brother be at the helm in the city we all came from to bring that kind of home feeling back into place. But again, you just made a great point. Maybe that's not the way we need to go. We won't know until we see what 2023 has to offer.
And you hit the nail right on the head. The worst, the thing that I want, and I don't want it to get this kind of treatment, like like Cam got. Cam came in, played a role, and then had his obvious issues, and so we kind of just kicked him to the curb. And now he's playing Madden, and that's what he's doing at the time for the moment. I don't want that for Wilkes, and we've seen, that was my biggest issue was that he had been having these talks with us, and maybe that was him putting all his eggs in one basket, and that's not good from his perspective. But we didn't hear a lot about him talking to other people, which we liked because when he talked about Sean Payton, he was talking to every floozy at the bar, and it was like, okay, well, you obviously don't want to come to us, so we're going to stop, giving this to you. I know the Texans were looking at him, and I know the Falcons were looking at him for the defensive coordinator position. I would hate. Absolutely. I would hate that so much.
That cannot happen. That cannot. If Wilkes goes to the Falcons, Charlotte would be on fire.
I mean, it would be like, and also for a defensive coordinator position, that would just make me so upset too. I would hope, for Houston. I really don't want him to go to Arizona because, like, if he's going to be successful at a place where he had an opportunity to do so once, I would have rather it been here. I also just don't. I think Arizona is a dumpster fire, and I would not. Yeah. I wouldn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. I see no reasoning as to why he would want to go out there, especially with the way that, I mean, obviously the West is always so up and down. You never know who's going to be good or who's going to be viable, who's going to be playoff contenders. You can never tell. I just wouldn't want him to go there. I think Houston, I think that he would not necessarily be successful there, but it'd be at least an opportunity. And they seem to, they seem to be pretty aggressive with how they do things. But yeah, I just really hope he doesn't go to the Falcons. I want him to go somewhere. I really do. And I knew he wasn't going to swallow his pride. Also, why is Frank Reich would you want him to stay on when you have a guy, when he's polarized the entire locker room? I was hoping for the reverse. I thought maybe we could convince Reich to come home and take that OC position, get a little bit of Remember the Titans going in Charlotte. I would have liked that, but that was, a pipe dream in and of itself. I just hope he gets something because he deserves to be a head coach. I really do think so, especially when you look at the other guys that are up there.
Yes, certainly. So I think Wilkes has the respect of a lot of people in the league. I think if you hear from his peers and other players and everybody at the end of the season when they talk about how Wilkes was, I mean, you mentioned it, his stoic personality, who he is as a person, how he presents himself on and off the field. His respect, and he's been touted as being one of the top-notch guys in the league. It goes bar none and without saying. And I hope he does get an opportunity. But at the same time, I don't want him to get put into a situation where he got put into his first time around with the Cardinals. I want him to get a true fair shot. I just don't want him to be in the NFC South if he's not a Panther. And that's just me being 100% honest and how I feel from a Panther standpoint. I wouldn't want Wilkes to be in any other uniform or paraphernalia in the NFC South if it's not a Panthers. But hey, we don't control that. He's a man. He can make the choice that he needs to make for him and his family and what's best for him. I just hope, end of the day, Wright comes in, he does what he needs to do. for our offense, and he brings in a solid coaching staff. We need a solid coaching staff, and he needs to draft well. So now we're going to see what he really is, what he's really about coming up here in June and July.
I agree, and I like I said, I hope that he's not the one making the final decisions as well. I hope it comes from a different perspective where it's more so Fitterer taking the reins. I'll be interested to see how that connection works between the two of them. I'll also be interested to see how it's going to work. I was happy again too. We talked about it. It was a 4-year deal. I think it was a great way to go about it. Not your 7-year deal that you gave to Rule for some ungodly reason. I will never ever be able to understand why. But for a 4-year is what is expected to be finalized. So I'll be interested to see if that's what it comes out to be, what kind of money we gave him. And then, yeah, I hope he just kind of hits the ground running. I think he's going to have a slow start. I think it's going to be slow going. I hope the coordinators are decided here, like I said, before. I'd like it by Valentine's Day, at least by the end of February, and definitely offensive coordinator before the draft. But then to just finish it out, I do want to say, we have to thank Steve Wilks again for making us care about football again, because that would not have happened. Thank God the reign of Rule ended and we had someone come in who made us care about football again. And he will have his stamp on Carolina football because of what he did. I mean, he already had a stamp because of what he had done, but this just further cements his legacy with the organization. Getting us into playoff contention when we were dead to rights is something that cannot be overlooked. And so hopefully he gets that gig. Hopefully Wright comes in and can right the ship and can get us and can get us in a new way, and maybe put us on a new wave. I wouldn't be remiss to that. I would like the mantra to stay the same, but if it means we have to find success a different way, I'd be happy to see that. But of course, all of that we'll have to wait for. And until then, keep pounding. Thanks, everyone, for joining the broadcast. We had this emergency one come up. We're going to see what happens in terms of what all they release coordinator position-wise. We weren't trying to just add to the gallery of talking heads going over every single, perspective idea of what might have happened at coaching. We didn't want to kind of add to that. And so we'll see what happens. We're going to be deciding when we're going to come back for our next season. And, of course, we're going to have all the mock drafts, all the free agency, genie that we want to have. And kind of go from there. But y'all, we've got a new era. It's the Reich era. So enjoy it. Say what you will about it. Try to all agree on something for once, dear God, please, or be happy for once, dear God, please. But yeah, y'all, we'll let you know we'll have our next episode up. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see y'all later.